It's so important to remember the Holocaust. You know, we need to hear these stories. We need to know that they happened. I think you cannot take for granted. Who knows what will happen in the future? You know, if we forget these stories, if we forget what happened and how and why, we're at risk of it repeating itself. Very nice to meet you. I'm going to project because I hear that your hearing's a bit...
My hearing is kaput.
It's kaput?
Yes.
So I shall project. So if anyone's watching this they think, why is Matt Lucas shouting at a man? They'll know why.
Yes, right.
So where and when were you born, Harry?
I was born in Poland in 1927.
So you are 93. You're 93 years old. And you were born in Poland,
yes.
But near the German border?
Very near the German border. From our town, Sosnowiec, you could go by tram into Germany, so it was very, very near.
What are your memories from your childhood?
Well, I remember it. My memory is very, very good, actually. I remember everything. Because, especially just before the war, so we were living in Sosnowiec, and as we were very near the German border, the war started on the 1st of September, and everybody thought that the Germans were going to come straight away because the Polish army were retreating and completely disorganized, not an army, but a group of Polish soldiers were just walking back into Poland itself. And so there was notices pinned up through the town that all the men up to a certain age, after 40 or something like it, they've got to go and register to join the Polish army. And my father went to the office as well there, and he got there and nobody was there. The office was closed, so that was a Friday. Over Shabbat we stayed at home, and still no sign of the Germans. So my father decided we should leave the town and go down to his mother. My grandmother lived. He had two brothers still living there as well. It's a small town near Krakow. So he got to the station, got to the train, and half an hour later, German planes flew over the train and they bombed it, because there were 8 of us, and made our way on foot by then. But we were very lucky to escape the bombing, of course. So it took us 4 days to get to where my grandmother lived. On the 4th day, we could see already the Germans actually on the main roads, because we were in the villages. So you see the German army moving into town, into Poland. So my father decided we should split the family. So my mother, my older sister, and my brother went ahead. It was not very far from where my grandmother lived. And while she was away, a platoon of Germans came into the village where we were staying. My father, my sisters, and myself. And he saw the Germans, and he grabbed my 2 young sisters by the hand and he started running into the field. And the Germans started shooting at us. And the platoon leader of the German shouted to them, "Stop shooting," the father and children running away. And that was my encounter with the Germans the first time.
And so what happened from there?
Later in the evening, we made our way into the town where my grandmother lived. And when we got there, apparently one of the German soldiers was killed. It was a war, of course. And they took a Jewish family, a father and his 2 grown-up sons, lined up the wall and they shot them.
In front of you?
Not in front of me. Because when we got there, we could still, the 3 bodies were still lying there.
Right.
So that was eventually, it was just before the high holiday, before Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. So we stayed up there. On the first Saturday, we took all the Jewish men out from their own homes and to get them to start working. And it took all the Jewish men out to transfer all the goods that were actually in the warehouses there. And of course it was Saturday. It was very, very sad.
So were you put to work?
I was 12 years old then.
Right.
We didn't do any work then. I don't remember doing any actual work. But after Sukkot, we decided to go back home, where we used to live there. And of course we got back home there in this town. It was absolutely terrible what happened to the town there. All the synagogues were burned or dynamited up. All the Jewish schools were destroyed as well. They got out of all the Jewish people, whatever apartments they had, and they threw them out. Fortunately, our apartment is still intact.
Really?
So we got into our apartment, but soon, of course, we had to share the apartment with all the people who were dispossessed of their homes.
So how many people were living in your apartment?
Well, there were 8 of us.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many, but you know, when you're young, you don't count how many. But it was pretty crowded, I can assure you, very crowded.
How long were you able to stay there?
Well, of course, we started the winter came around, of course.
And what year was this?
1939.
So this is 39, so the first winter of the war.
1939, 40 years. It was very, very severe winter, very severe winter. And the heating, of course, that was a problem as well. And towards the end of the winter, we started breaking up whatever furniture we had left, and that's to keep warm. And as soon as the spring came along, so my father decided we should leave the town, make our way back down to where my grandmother lived. He still had 2 brothers living there as well, they're married as well. And so obviously they managed to find a very small house, very small house, and not far from where my grandmother lived. And we moved in there. Of course, living there, it was very, very hard. Of course, like all the other people, there's a village. There were no toilets, no running water.
Presumably at this time.
Oh, mind you, even in Poland, hardly anybody had actually running water. We had a toilet, actually not in our own home, but halfway in the half landing usually had a toilet. So we had to go there from the half landing. But when we got into the village there was nothing, we were outside premises, so we used to go down there. And when we came back, I took my 2 sons to Poland again in 1990 for the first time, after 1945. And those toilets were still there. I don't think they were used actually, but they were still in the same place where it was. So
now you were living in this village?
We were living in the village there. And of course, we used to go to work. That was hard work as well, really work, because the Germans had to issue new identity cards for everybody as well. And my father told us, the children, he said, don't give them your real date of birth. Tell them you're 2 years older.
Why?
Because if you were under 14, you couldn't get a ration card.
Right.
So I became 14. I was 1927. I thought I was born in 1925. And so we got a ration card as well.
And what kind of work were you doing?
Oh, and they loaded us up on a tractor, and we were taken away. Nobody knew where we were going. Young people, of course. And then we were taken away to a place where they were making bricks, a brick factory.
Right.
And the work there was very, very hard. It was boiling hot days. Not my older sister, my second sister, Sarah, she was actually taken away as well. Of course, we didn't know where she was, but eventually she managed to take a letter home, and that she was in Krakow airport, and she was working there in the kitchen. So she was fortunate. She was all right. She was fine then. But then, of course, the 1942, that's when the Holocaust really started.
Yeah.
And again, notices were pinned up throughout the town that we got to get set the assembly points, and we were assigned to an assembly point as well. And they told us we can take one small suitcase, we can take all the food what we've got as well, and go to the assembly point. And directly opposite us was an older man. He lived directly opposite us. He knew he wasn't going anywhere because his wife was blind. So the Germans took his gun out and he shot him dead and then, just in front of everybody.
In front of you?
Just in front of us, yes.
Was that the first time you saw someone killed?
Oh, yes, the first time I saw somebody killed, yes.
What a senseless,
And
pointless murder.
Terrible, really dreadful, terrible, dreadful. And so we made our way down to the assembly point, and they've already had a selection, all men, not women. And the men were taken away for no reason at all. They took the rabbi away, they took one of my uncles was taken away as well. And they loaded on trucks as well. And then when all the trucks were finished now, when all the men were taken away, and then all the women and everybody else who was actually on the assembly point, they were taken away as well. We'd driven us in the same direction where the men were taken away in the first place. And then we were driving towards Krakow, and we drove past a forest, not a very big forest, because I used to go there in the summer when I used to go visit my grandmother. You could hear an awful shooting going down there inside the forest. And one of the women actually in the truck started crying and screaming, because we knew what's happening to those men there. And they stopped the truck and pulled the woman out from the truck, and they shot her there in front of everybody else. So they quieted everybody down. And we drove until just about 15 miles from Krakow, and we stopped outside a town where my mother's family came from, Slomniki, and stopped there, and the trucks pulled over to one side, and we could see the Germans were digging trenches right around that field, and we really thought our end was coming down. But there was a railway line there as well, and we were the first ones to arrive near there. And gradually more and more people kept arriving on the field. And eventually the field was absolutely chock-a-block full of people. After 4 days, the trains arrived on the railway line that was next to the field. And again, all the women, irrespective of fit or old or young, all the women and all the children, everyone, irrespective, my mother, my sister, my grandmother, everybody, all the women were pushed into the train straight away. And that's the last time I saw my mother, and some of my sisters, of course, as well. And
do you know what happened to your family?
Later on, we didn't find out at all, because my father, we went to. Then another train arrived, and there was another selection of the men, and we had to walk past the Germans with our palms of the hands showing, but we've got calluses on our hands, and if you had calluses on the hands, they put to one side, and all the other men they pushed together with the woman as well, all the trains. And the trains moved away, and then another train arrived, and we were loaded on the train, and we moved to first concentration camp, Plaszow, just outside Krakow. And you can see the film actually, Schindler, I think it's called the Schindler's List. And we got over there, and we got into the concentration camp there in Plaszow. So my father ran away from the camp, and he wanted to know what happened to all the people who were taken with the trains. Nobody could find anything out. Absolutely nothing, just disappeared, completely disappeared. The train drivers were moved from when they came to place, they pushed somewhere else, and nobody knew anything about it. Nobody knew. And not only this, but my younger sister, when we were, went to she was in hospital. She had a very bad ear infection. She was still in hospital, so he went down there from Plaszow. And he went there, he got her there, and he got her out as well. And then my brother ran away as well from Plaszow. And then my father sent a Polish man up with a small truck. He told them where I would be as well, because he was working, making a railway embankment. And so as I was walking back from the work, my father, because on no night shift then, so the Polish man, joined us together he called out my name. He went up to me, took my hand by the hand, and we walked away. And the Germans fortunately didn't see anything at all.
Oh.
So we walked back, and then I was taken down there to my father, my brother, and my sister, and my father's brother. He was there as well. But it didn't last very long. After about a week, we were picked up by the Germans, and I was sent back to Plaszow. But it was my brother didn't know where he was going to. So I was home by myself in Plaszow.
So you worked in a munitions factory, is that right?
That's after Plaszow. After 1 year in Plaszow, we were sent to Skarżysko-Kamienne. It's right in the middle of Poland. And there were 3 factories there, A, B, and C. And I was sent to Factory C. And when we arrived at Factory C there, and it was evening, and we looked through the gates of the factory, and before we got there, everything in my mouth was bitter. Everything there was yellow. The trees, the lights, the people, everything there was yellow.
Yellow?
Yellow. The smell was absolutely horrendous as well. So I said, what's the terrible smell in here? And they pointed to a box which was standing directly opposite there. There was a washroom. And they said all the people who died there the week, they take the dead bodies and put them in that box. And once a week a truck comes along to take the dead bodies away. But you can imagine the smell of the putrefying bodies. My work was there to make mines, land mines and sea mines. And we had to fill them with picric acid, picrine.
Right.
And that's what actually made everybody got yellow. We had no protective clothing whatsoever.
And so people died from their exposure to that?
The people actually managed to live there working on the picrine 6 weeks. After 6 weeks they were dead.
How did you survive that?
I survived actually because again I was not any heroics at all, but one day it was a very, very heavy snowfall, and the trains couldn't get in with the empty shells. So we had to go make our way into the forest. There were storage places there, and you had to store the empty shells, carry them down to the factory to be filled with explosives. And that's how it was. And in the morning I was supposed to go back to my normal work, but I attached myself to a transport company, and they let me stay there. And that was my saving grace.
So in 1944 you managed to...
In 1944, we were still working there in the munitions factory, and then of course eventually they closed the factory altogether, and we sent up to Buchenwald, a concentration camp in Germany.
Yeah.
And when we got to Buchenwald, everybody, when you talk about Buchenwald, what a terrible place it was. For me, it was like a holiday camp by comparison to what I had in Skarżysko Kamienne. Got rid of all of my clothes. They had no clothes, but rags we were wearing. And had shoes. I had no shoes at all because we used to have whatever we could keep our feet somewhat closed. But we eventually, we got showers, got new identity cards there, and we get clogs to wear on our feet.
That is extraordinary that you actually say that Buchenwald, which is, I mean, it's infamous as one of the worst concentration camps, for you, gave you a better life than the one that you just come from.
No question about it, but it didn't last very long.
No.
We stayed there actually only for 2 weeks. And then the same company I was working for in the munitions cut back to Buchenwald, took us all out again, and again back to another munitions factory. But the munitions factory there was completely different as well. It's there again, we had to fill in the bombs actually with trottle, and so that's what we had to do.
Where were you when the war ended?
That was in Schlieben, it's called a place called Schlieben, not far from Buchenwald.
Right.
But it was on the way from our place there, it was about 80 kilometers to Berlin. Leipzig was about the same distance, and then Dresden. So we could see whatever, but the British planes were flying overnight on the bombing missions, and then the American planes were flying in the daytime. And so we could see the place, of course, the night shift was very, very easy work because we had to keep the lights out. So it was, but it's the sky was red with the fires actually after the bombing missions.
Really? Because you were hospitalised for a couple of months then, weren't you?
Didn't know anything about it. I couldn't talk. My whole body was in spasms as well. I couldn't do anything at all, absolutely nothing at all. I didn't know what happened to me, but they must be feeding me somehow because they didn't know what was wrong. I didn't have typhus because I had typhus in Plaszow, so, but it was absolutely terrible. And later on, when I got better, all the young people have been registered to go to England. And I said, I don't want to go to England, got nothing to do with England at all. Everybody, all the people who came here, they didn't go to England, they had to go to Palestine, wanted to go, but...
That's where you wanted to go?
Yes, of course, because the Polish people in Poland before the war, he said, you go to Palestine, you go to Palestine. So he said, let you go to Palestine.
Oh, I'm sorry you got stuck here with us.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sorry, because I've had the honour of meeting you, but...
very pleasant as well.
But you decided to stay here then? You were one of the Windermere...
Yes, when I got better, of course, and then we sent to Windermere, the 300 boys, and in Windermere, of course, we started learning to be human again.
Do you know what happened to your family?
My family? I didn't know anything. Nobody knew actually until the end of the war. At the end of the war, they found out that the people who were taken away there in 1942 from the field, in our case, were taken to a place called Belschutz, near the East German border. And there was not a concentration camp. It was an extermination camp.
Right.
The trains used to arrive there, and each train apparently had 2,000 people on it. They unloaded the people as quickly as possible. And of course people had no water, nothing. absolutely nothing in the train there. And they told them, the people were crying for water, and they said, as soon as you cut your hair off, deloused, turned naked into the gas chambers. It wasn't gas chambers, it was huts, insulated huts. And they got all those people in there. They started 2 Russian tank engines were attached to those gas chambers, and they're spewing in carbon monoxide. And that's how the people were killed.
Unimaginable, isn't it?
And they, between February 1942 and November 1942, 600,000 people were murdered. And all my family. I didn't find out anything, of course, until we came to England. Of course, we didn't know anything about it at all.
So did you have any other family members who survived the war?
Yes, my sister Sarah and my brother. The 3 of us.
So why do you join the March of the Living every year?
I went back to Poland in 1990 for the first time. Took my 2 sons with, and my daughter-in-law. And I did. And from then onwards, if you haven't been to Poland, if you haven't been in the March of the Living, you don't know actually what happened to the Jewish people, actually. You get to know actually what has happened in Poland. You travel from one place to another. The organization is unbelievable. It's hard work, but it's absolutely unbelievable. Unbelievable education. You can't fault it. You really can't fault it.
And why is it important to tell your story?
Well, we lived it through. And for Jewish people, actually, then you should know actually what happened to their families as well. Everybody, I can't imagine. I don't know if you've got any families before the war.
Yeah, well, my grandmother was a refugee from Berlin.
And she came back, she's a refugee.
Yeah, but she never went back to Germany. She never wanted to go back. She said that she couldn't go back somewhere where they'd asked her to leave. Well, I'm sorry you couldn't go on the March of the Living in Poland this year. Instead, you have to sit with an idiot like me in a field in Mill Hill, but you've still been able to tell your story, and we thank you for that.
And I hope you come with us next time.
I would like to, very much.
No question about it. You really must do it. You must do it. Yes. Because if you haven't seen it actually, what's happened actually to Poland, to all the Jewish people there, and all the educators, we never forget it. Never, ever, 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 ever. Yes.
I think talking to Harry was a real eye-opener. It was extraordinary how many times he was moved around during the war. So I didn't really know that happened to people. So he had so many near misses, so many moments where he almost didn't make it. And I've really seen an extraordinary glimpse into the power of the human spirit there. He's a survivor, and he utterly understands the horrors because he's seen them, but he's gone on to not only tell his story but live an amazing life, have 4 children and several grandchildren, and he's been married for 67 years. He's settled here. It's not the life he ever would have thought he was going to have, but his spirit is, it's very humbling to meet him and hear his story.